Today I want to share something that I'm really excited about, and that is the live performance interface that I built in Touchdesigner that I'm naming the Patchdeck. And this is something that I built back in 2019 when I had my first show with K&D, and I needed some kind of performance interface to play live visuals in Touchdesigner. And since I couldn't find anything online that would match my needs, I kind of started designing my own interface, and this is what I came up with. And I built this together with my colleague Matthias Timo Finning, and ever since then I have used this for a bunch of different shows with K&D and also other occasions, and it was always very handy to have, and I just wanted to share it, but it still was a bit messy. So over the last couple of weeks I did some cleanup and I redesigned the entire thing with widgets. So this is now available on my Patreon. You can get it there in the Jedi tier. And let me just give you a quick overview of how it's all set up. Basically the way I designed this is very minimalistic. You have two decks, a A and a B deck, and you can load your patches and visuals in there. So on the left here you can see that there are some example visuals loaded, and if I hover over them, I can either load it into the A or the B deck. And so if I load this on the A deck, you can see that it's loaded here. And you're not limited to this page of visuals. You can actually have 10 decks of patches, and basically however much you want. But I think this is more than enough to, store all of your patches in here. Now, on the right side, you can see that once this is loaded up, the labels of the values actually changed. Instead of those standard buttons, and instead of the standard labeling, it's now representing the actual values that we are changing with those labels. So you can, inside of each patch, you can label the parameters depending on what you're actually controlling with it. And so here you can start changing those values and manipulating them in real time to play back your patch. And originally all of this was just for MIDI mapped, just for a MIDI controller, and I built this originally for the APC40, so that's kind of the standard, the ideal controller I would say for this. But I also made some MIDI mappings for the Novation Launch Key XL and the Korg Nano Control. So this is kind of representing, the rotary knobs, the buttons. For each patch, you kind of have 4 rotary knobs, 8 buttons, and 4 sliders. So for A and the B deck. Then you also have this reset button, which you could use to reset any parameters or any effects that you have inside your patch. So you can hook this up to a reset for a feedback or stuff like that. And then you also have clear A and clear B to actually clear it out of the deck. And so actually once one patch is loaded, and you try to load a different one on the same deck, it's locked. So that's just a safety mechanism. So you first have to clear it, and then you can load another patch in. What you also have is a crossfader to fade in between the A and the B deck. So you can see at the top here, this is the master going out. So if I slide my crossfader here, you can see that you can mix them or just make a transition from one to the other. Then you have the master opacity here as a slider, which just controls the opacity. And at the bottom here, you have some post effects. So these are applied on the master. So basically I have this edge effect here and a feedback scale and stuff like that. So just some effects that you can apply to the entire composition basically. And you can also change those inside of the patch. Some other features that I added are some stats you can see. So you can see if you're having some frame drops, you can see the frame rate that you're playing back at, and the VRAM and CPU memory that is currently used. You can also see the resolution that you're playing at, and then you have this NDI out toggle and the Spout or siphon out toggle. So you can either send this over NDI to a different machine over the network and then access it from there, for example, in Resolume, and then play it back on your projector, LED wall, whatever. So this is the way that I would use this patch, and that I always used it is as a kind of secondary machine where I would have this Touchdesigner patch running, and then this would feed over NDI into Resolume, which would go to the main output. And you could do the same with Spout internally over the GPU. So you can stay on the same machine and send from Touchdesigner to Resolume on a single machine, which might be a bit more performance intensive, but if you don't have two machines, then this would make sense. At the moment, this is actually the only option to output, so I don't have the function for an external display output currently, because that's not how I used it. If it's something that you would need, then let me know and I will add this to the next update. It's just a little bit complicated with the resolutions of the UI interface and the secondary display. And if you have different resolutions, this is a bit tricky, so this would need a while to figure out, but definitely something that I can work on in the future. And as a last button here, I added this reset MIDI, which is just a little toggle that sometimes I had some problems with my MIDI controller kind of disconnecting, and this reset MIDI would help to get the connection back. Just something that I added in here also to fill up the space. And then the last functions are just a date, time, and a battery monitor, where you can see that we are charging and the capacity of the battery. As I said, this is a very minimalistic and simple setup, but this also really forces me to get creative with my patches, and it really helps narrow down the actual functions that I need. So it really forces you to get things done, I feel. And the way I actually always set up the patches is that at 0, like if all the values are at 0, this is kind of the least motion that is going on. It's always the starting point from a patch. And then once you start going up with all those values, like the maximum of all of it would be kind of the maximum impact of the patch. So that way it would always be easy to remember how you would play the patches. It would always kind of start at 0 and then you kind of go from there. That's just the way that I like to play live. And you can also see that there isn't much like audio reactivity in the interface. There is audio reactivity in the patch, and I'll show you later. But it's just not something that I use too often, because I prefer to play it live, like with buttons. And kind of, me playing it as an instrument, sort of. Instead of this kind of audio reactivity to... I'm just not the biggest fan always of audio reactivity, because it can sometimes just be like this jittery motion and stuff like that. But again, it's something that you can build inside of the patches. So let's actually have a look on how this is set up and built. This is the main node tree that you can see, where you can see the individual blocks that are running here and what's going on under the hood. So this patches is kind of the main window where you would set up all your patches. And here you can already see that you can change the global resolution. So this is the resolution that you can access inside of the patches to set it up. And right now I've just set it to Full HD for demonstration purposes. But yeah, this is where you change that. And then if we go inside of here, you can see that this is where you can set up the individual patches. So you can see the 2 example patches right here. And let's just jump inside of the third one, just to quickly demonstrate on how you would go about building a new patch. And first of all, you can see that here in this custom tab, you can give it a name, and I'm going to call it noise demo. I'm going to go inside, and this is the main layout of every single patch. So first of all, you have the control input. This is the MIDI controls or the controls from the interface coming in. And for this to actually come in, it has to be loaded. The deck has to be loaded. So I'm going to just quickly go into the performance mode, load this third deck right here, the noise demo on my A deck. And now when I start changing the MIDI values, the notes, now when I start changing my MIDI sliders, you can see that it's coming in here. So only the active, like the currently active deck, is actually receiving the MIDI values. Then you can start, accessing those inside of your patch. And once you have them mapped to your different values, you can name them and give them the labels up here in this table. So you can see that you have the first row for the rotary knobs, the second one for the sliders, and then 2 rows for the buttons. And by going in here and changing this, you can actually label them. And now for a quick demo, let me just delete this constant here, and I'm going to add a noise. I'm going to hook that up to the out. And I'm going to change in the comment tab the resolution to mod.vars for variables .resx, and the same thing for resy. And that is how I access this global resolution that we set up before in the main tab. Now, I can start, for example, animating the noise. And for that, actually, let me show you this quick tool that I just built outside of this patch. So if you go back out and you go to these patch elements here, these are the different elements that you can use inside of your patch. So first of all, this is just an empty patch that you can use instead of these. If you create some new ones, this is the audio signal coming in, audio levels. So this is for the Audioreactivity that I can show you in a bit. And the channel info, this is the table for the naming, the controls with the incoming control values. And here I created one base for value mapping and one for speed. And those are just, those are just handy little tools that I will copy back into my patch. And the speed is basically just, if I go inside here, it's just a constant with math to remap it, and then a speed chop and an out node. So nothing fancy, but it's just something that will save you a little bit of screen real estate and make it easier to remap those values. So I can just take, for example, the rotary one, drag it onto the speed as a reference here, and then I can select my range. So, from 0 to something, depending on how fast you want it to go. And then we can export this onto the translate Z of the noise. And this way we have some animated noise that I control with my rotary knob, which is nice. Just to demonstrate this, let me also add the second one here. So this value mapping, let me take the first slider here. I'm going to drag that onto my value as a reference. I'm going to map it to the amplitude, and I want to go from 0.3 to 1.7 or something. So in here, I can just type minimum and maximum. And then you also have this lag chop, so you can set a little bit of a smoothing and a delay. So if I export this here and I move my slider, you can see that this is now changing the amplitude of my noise. And so that's how you would set up your patches, And then this goes to the out node. So this is what is accessed in the patch. And then you have this thumbnail here. And this you actually have to lock. So first of all, this is just taking 1/8 of the original resolution, because this is what is loaded up in the interface. And to save some memory, this is a bit smaller, and you have to lock it so it's actually not cooking the patch inside of the interface. So make sure to lock this, and then this will show up as the thumbnail for this specific patch. And so now if I go back into perform mode, you can see that we have our noise demo here. I can load this up. I can change those values. And in fact, let me just jump back in and change those labels. So R1 is now the speed, and S1 is amplitude. And going back into perform mode, you can see that now this is labeled here. And so, yeah, that is basically how you can set up new patches. And just quickly to show you the rest of what's going on under the hood here. This is then being sent to the select A or B. We have the crossfader here. After that, we have the post effects. So in here, it's accessing the control parameters from the last row. So from these effect knobs that I also have on my MIDI control. And these are just running globally. So yeah, these are the edge effect, the feedback. Post effects going into the master dim. So this is where we can change the brightness of the master. And this is where it's being sent out to NDI or Spout. So this is the patches. Again, this is probably the main area that you would be working in. Another important one is this control tab right here. So this is where the MIDI mapping is happening and the MIDI values are sent to the actual interface. If you want to use a different controller than the APC40, which I mapped, or the Novation launch key, then I created this MIDI mapping reference here. So if you just cook this, I basically just recreated the interface but labeled the buttons with the MIDI mapping that you would need to set up inside of the MIDI mapping value. So you would go here into the dialogues MIDI device mapper. And right now you can see that it's the Novation launch controller is plugged in, and the MIDI mapping is taken from the launch key mapping that I created. So here we have this nano control, launch key, and APC40, but you could also add a new device. And then here you would just look at this table, see the values that you want to access. So for example, the slider 1 would be S1 in here. And then you just move the one that you have on your MIDI controller, check the value here, and fill that out accordingly. So you can create your own MIDI mapping according to this guide right here. But basically this is what's going on. This is where the MIDI device comes in. It's then renamed to the appropriate values that are actually used in the interface. And from here it is sent to the interface, because there it gets mixed up with the values that you can change directly on the interface, right? So you can either control it with MIDI or with the widgets. And I did try to create like a pickup value. So you first have to move with your MIDI controller to the value that it's currently at on the interface to pick it up. But in the end, it was a little bit more buggy than useful. And I think you would either use it with the MIDI controls or with the interface. So I decided not to use pickup, but instead it would just jump right to the value that you change on the MIDI. So from the interface, it's coming back into here. And this is where it's actually being sent to the master control for the post effects and the deck control for the A and the B deck respectively. So this is the MIDI mapping area. Then we have the interface. So in here, if we go into the main interface, this is where all of the interface is built. Basically, we have this, all of the widgets, all of the layouts, the controls coming in from the MIDI, and then all of the buttons and the controls and the labeling of the sliders and all of this stuff. So again, you probably don't really need to change anything here unless you want to rebuild the interface or add some features. From there, it is going into the perform window. So here you can set the monitor that you want to run the interface on. Then in this local tab, this is where our variables are set up for the resolution. So you don't really need to go in there too much. And then you have this audio tab for Audioreactivity. So basically, right now, this is super basic. I just took the audio analysis tool from the palette in Touchdesigner. And in here, you could access the external audio coming in and analyze it here. And this is going into this audio levels, which you could access in any of the patches. So you could easily add Audioreactivity to all of your patches. And yeah, that's basically it. That's the Patchdeck. It's now available on Patreon, and let me know if it works for you. I tested this on Windows and Mac on the Touchdesigner 2023 12600 release. It should also work on the new 2025. Again, I've just tested it on a couple of devices, so if you have any issues, let me know. I will try to sort them out as good as possible. And I will try to keep updating this with some features that you might request. But yeah, in general, this is just my interface that I've been using for the last couple of years. I hope that you find it as useful as I do. So I hope you enjoy this, and I will see you in the next one.